Praise the Lord. But didn't it seem like a simpler time? Didn't it feel like we're all on part of the same team? Even if we were wrong to think that, didn't it feel
to
that
be
way?
like an Orthodox Catholic?
Yeah, it's like there's Orthodox Catholics and there's heretics. Didn't that just...
Right.
My gosh. So
simple. Yeah. Yeah. And now people that we've known who have been high profile people and not high profile people.
Who we've worked with.
Yeah. Yeah. Who would have raised their hand like, yes, I'm an Orthodox Catholic, I'm a faithful, practicing Catholic, have found themselves taking positions that I never would have imagined. I'm sure they wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago.
And on both sides.
Yep.
Like I've seen people go down the feminist route and abandon Catholicism.
Yeah.
I've seen people go down the BLM route.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, they're cloaking it with Catholic language. And you're like, okay, I'm trying to give you a listen here. But it seems like this is more interesting to you than your Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then they left. But then you've got the people we love who would be sedevacantists, whether they identify as such.
Yeah.
It seems to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, the storms and the winds and the currents of the world are such that they are constantly eroding the perimeter of what it means to be a Catholic. And I think if you start to venture out there, you will drift away with it so easily. If our starting point isn't our Catholic faith, and I think that intellectual tradition, if we're not really, really well grounded, and it's so easy to adopt, even if it's not the conclusions, like the kind of postmodern or modern intuitions about things where you're even bringing that to your Catholic faith and reasoning it according to those sort of patterns. And I think it very easily becomes untenable and hard to maintain. And I've seen, now that I've been Catholic for almost 20 years, I've seen tragically a lot of people sort of drift off, like on the big scale and just, you know, smaller, quieter instances of that. It's a hard thing to watch.
It's interesting how it happens. Like I'm interested in the kind of psychology behind how someone would apostatize. Mm-hmm. Because at one point you're telling people you have to be Catholic, and if you reject the Catholic faith, like you won't be saved. We say that kind of thing. Yeah. And then 10 years later, you're now Eastern Orthodox, or you're now a sedevacantist.
Or just nothing.
Or just nothing.
Yeah. I don't know if you experience this a lot, but I don't know. There's been times where in my circle of friends, I've felt like I'm the kind of Catholic anchor. And maybe that's because, you know, I'm now sort of a high profile Catholic, but also even just in my local community, I had been pivotal in starting things like young adult community groups and things like that. And so almost sort of like a pastoral role within my lay community of friends. And so when people start to struggle with their faith, I feel like I at times was a focal point for them to either grasp onto their faith and to hold on to it, or to be resentful towards if it was like a hopeless thing. So in my experience, I've sat down with not a lot, but enough people to have those conversations with them. So like, what's going on with you, and where are you at with your faith? And I find that they almost always provide intellectual objections at that point. It's like, well, it's because this doesn't make sense to me anymore, and then you'll have those conversations and you'll work through those issues. And I'm almost always really unimpressed with the objections, to the point where it's like, it's not that, obviously, right? It's got to be something else. And I mean, you can't obviously paint with broad strokes across everybody, but I don't think it's typically that they've done their due diligence and they've really studied the intellectual tradition here and penetrated all the potential options. And then they've thought, and then they drift into agnosticism. It's like, well, was agnosticism so compelling to you that it had all the answers you were looking for? I don't think so. You've just fallen into the default. You've become complacent.
And I think before drifting into, say, agnosticism or some other sect of Christianity or what have you, I think you first become just less combative with those people. And you go, you know what? Things are confusing, and look, who am I? I don't know. Like, I guess I'm a bit confused too, and we're all doing our best. Like, you paint the, let's say, agnostic in a favorable light first. Right. It seems to me that that's what I would do, and then
you don't really realize
I would allow myself to drift. I wouldn't choose to drift. I would say something nice about the agnostic, and then I would probably find myself.
Could be, yeah. And you can't discount the effects of sin. Like, I don't want to accuse people of that's why you left, because the shame of sin or something like that. But sin darkens the intellect, right? Like, you've got Dostoevsky here, right? And for anybody who's interested in reading Crime and Punishment and doesn't want it spoiled for you, maybe just like take a coffee break. But like in terms of the psychology of what sin can do to a person, and how it can have certain effects that they didn't even expect themselves. So like Raskolnikov, that's what you say,
that's
I think, right?
Yeah.
So he's the main character, and he thinks of himself as being like this great man, right? Like this almost like Nietzschean, like strong man who can wield power without consequence, right? And he imagines, like he thinks of like the Napoleonic type characters of history who have done things and haven't suffered negative ill effects of it, right? And so he keeps kind of playing with these ideas and talking himself up into doing something.
And he's in isolation while he's doing it. That's the other key factor.
And poverty for that matter. So there's sort of an economic desperation in all of this. And so he comes up with a solution, and it's to most of us, we would consider it a sin or even an illegal act, but it ends up escalating into something just really, really bad. But even still something that he probably would have imagined, if I'm one of these great men, I should be able to do this. I should be able to wield this kind of power. And he can't cope with it. Like he starts to suffer like psychotic delusions and delirium, and he passes out for long periods of time and wakes up and doesn't know where he is, and just the distress of it all, and he becomes suicidal. And then there's an investigation into the crime that takes place, and he ends up having these little jostling matches with one of the investigators, and he's having an internal dialogue the entire time, thinking about, oh, I'm smarter than this guy, and oh, look what he's trying to do here, and then second guessing himself, and everything is just so internalized and quite irrational, again, because of the effects of that sin, I think. So sin makes you stupid and then unable to see the truth for what it is.
Or your stupidity.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyone who's gotten into a heated argument with their spouse knows how quickly your mind can become clouded.
Sure.
Like I've been in arguments with my wife. We don't argue a lot, but the times we argue, I'll say things. I'm like, why would I say that? Or it'll seem like I'm completely right and you're completely wrong. And even intellectually, I can be like, that's probably not true, but I'm unwilling. So it's almost like those, if you've been angry ever with somebody in that way, that's kind of like a little foretaste of what sin can bring about, perhaps.
Yeah, and in the context of marriage, I think pretty much every couple will go through that to varying degrees, just depending on the scale of your passions. Some couples are a little bit more out there than others, but my wife and I are quite reserved people for the most part, but we've had pretty seriously escalated conversations and said things that we don't mean. And we're at a certain point, you just start fighting about a position that you don't even know what you're fighting about. You're just defending yourself at a certain point, right? And then I think the real test of a person's goodwill and the quality of their marriage, or the endurance of their marriage, is what's the aftermath of that look like? What do they do in response? Because whoever won the fight at that point becomes really irrelevant, because you often don't even know what the spark was that started it. But now it's the point where you come back to the table and say, I'm an idiot. I'm so sorry, and I love you, and that's the thing you weren't willing to do when the fight started. You were holding your ground. You were like, no, she's wrong, right? Or he's wrong, and then you eventually have to come to the point, if you're going to get over this, where you do the thing you should have done in the beginning, just been like, yeah, you're right. I'm an idiot. I'm wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And I'm sorry. And then if they're a person of goodwill, they should do the same thing.
But I think I like what you said earlier about people often giving intellectual reasons that don't seem that compelling and probably wouldn't have compelled them a few years back.
No.
Right? So it might be something else going on. But to me, like, I like to think of it as like there's a lens through which we look upon the world.
Right.
And sometimes that lens no longer works. It feels that way.
Yeah.
Forget the
You're
objectivity.
looking through a glass darkly.
You're looking at things and it makes sense. Like, oh yeah, this is it. This is the solution to all of these issues.
Yep.
And then I think for these people, at some point, it's like, this doesn't make sense of the world anymore. That's their kind of phenomenological experience. Like, this doesn't work for me anymore.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.